1949. Samuel Putnam publie sa nouvelle traduction de Don Quichotte, le premier roman moderne en langue anglaise. La République populaire de Chine, la République fédérale allemande et la République démocratique allemande voient le jour. Nathuram Godse et Narayan Apte, les assassins de Mohandas Gandhi, sont condamnés à mort. Mort d'un commis voyageur, une pièce de théâtre américaine d'Arthur Miller, est présentée pour la première fois au théâtre de Morosco. Grady, une vache pesant 550 kg, reste coincée à l'intérieur d'un silo dans une ferme aux États-Unis. La première moitié de l'opéra de Verdi, Aida, dirigée par Arturo Toscanini, est diffusée par NBC en direct. 1984, le célèbre roman de George Orwell est publié. L'astronome anglais, Fred Hoyle, forge le mot Big Bang lors d'une interview avec BBC. Une jeune femme indienne, qu'on surnomme la bombe atomique hindoue, prend d'assaut le monde de la danse. Elle s'appelle Mrinalini Sarabhai.
Anum dum danaganum dattaganum dadaganum dum danum dada anum dum danaganum dattaganum dadaganum dada.
L'histoire du Bharatanatyam s'étend sur plus d'un millénaire, avec Chidambaram, un temple du XIe siècle en Inde du Sud, montrant des positions de danse encore réalisées dans ce style. Au cours des siècles, le Bharatanatyam est resté une danse du temple, dansée dans le Sanctum Sanctorum des temples par des danseurs solos mariés à la divinité, en tant qu'offrande religieuse. Vers la fin du XIXe siècle, cette forme de danse était tombée en disgrâce, en partie à cause de la politique prude des dirigeants britanniques. C'est au cours des jours les plus sombres du Bharatanatyam que Mrinalini, fille du docteur Subram et Amu Swaminathan, est née à Madras, à ce moment une ville sous présidence britannique. Dès son plus jeune âge, elle a montré une profonde passion pour la danse. Mais il n'y avait pas d'école pour enseigner la danse classique et elle a dû passer des années dans un village avec un gourou, faisant face à de nombreuses difficultés. Elle a été un pionnier parmi ceux qui ont redonné à la danse classique indienne sa respectabilité et elle a présenté sa magnificence à l'Inde et au monde entier.
Mrinalini Sarabhai was the pioneer among Indian contemporary dancers. She had studied classical Indian dance forms, Bharatanatyam, from no less a guru than Guru Meenakshindram Pillai, Muthukumaran Pillai and Kathakali from Guru Kunjukurup. But she was already a legend when I was barely 22. When I saw her, she was a thinking woman. She mastered the technique, but she also thought, what do I do with this technique? How do I relate this technique to the contemporary situations, to the environment? This was the time of the nation building activity, and in the nation building activity she thought she has to contribute something, not just do classical dance performances.
Encouragée par son mari, le scientifique Vikram Sarabhai, elle a fondé son école de danse d'Arpana au Gujarat pour enseigner et diffuser la danse classique indienne.
Well, when I married Vikram and came for the first time to Gujarat, I found that there was really no knowledge about South Indian dancing here. There was Garba, of course, and so I started first dancing myself wherever people invited me. Then slowly I thought it is much better to start an academy and let other children learn to dance. And that's how Darpana was formed.
Mrinalini first started dancing, dance had just come out of the temples where the space for dancing was tiny. Many of her contemporaries continued to do Bharatanatyam on the stage, covering only the center. So one of her first innovations was in spreading out the dance, in making it wide, filling the stage, making it broad, so that the stage got covered and the audience could see a much larger, much more expansive form of dance.
வானவும் பூமியும் பதஞ்சலியும் புலியும் வானவும் பூமியும்.
Bharatanatyam has both the masculine and the feminine aspects, the Tandava and the Lasya. But because it was done only by women, it was the Lasya that was predominant. When Mrinalini formed her own group and more men started doing Bharatanatyam, she emphasized on the Tandava or the masculine aspects for both the men and the women, and this made her style of Bharatanatyam not only expansive but extremely vigorous and strong.
Govinda Madhava Gopala Keshava Madhava Gopala Keshava Narasimha Achyuta Narayana Narasimha Achyuta Narayana Dasharatha Nandana Sita Manohara Sita Manohara Danava Samhara.
Rukmini Devi Arundale and my mother Mrinalini were the first two educated pioneers reintroducing Bharatanatyam to the world. But I think being called the foremost exponent of Bharatanatyam was never enough for her. And she started wanting to push the boundaries of the style. She started this very complex group choreography. She took the alphabet of Bharatanatyam and created to abstract thoughts. She threw away lyrics completely. In fact, what she spawned is what we call Bharatanatyam experimentation even today. She had this restlessness of spirit that constantly led her to search for something new. She started working with sound, for instance. She took the bowls, the onomatopoeic syllables of the mridangam, the percussion instrument, and while they were neutral sounds, she imbibed them with meaning and with feeling, like in her piece Memories, a Ragged Fragment of Eternity.
I always wanted a change from Bharatanatyam as it was, and always would add a little thing to Bharatanatyam also to make it a little more interesting. I get fed up with just doing the same thing every day.
Mrinalini était aussi la seule femme qui ait appris le kathakali, une danse sud-indienne. Elle a réussi à s'imposer dans ce milieu d'hommes et a obtenu la récompense la plus prestigieuse, Veer Shrinkala. Le kathakali est une forme de théâtre dansé, originaire du Kerala dans le sud de l'Inde, créé il y a 500 ans. Un spectacle de kathakali initialement éclairé par des lampes à huile et vu par des milliers de personnes dure toute la nuit. Le maquillage et les costumes sont exagérés pour créer un monde plus grand que la réalité, celui du monde mythique. Mrinalini a commencé à regarder au-delà du Bharatanatyam pour son propre groupe appelé Darpana et est allée au Kerala à la recherche d'artistes. Elle y a trouvé le danseur masculin Chatuni Paniker qui est devenu son associé à long terme et très vite ils ont commencé à voyager à travers le monde avec un groupe de danseurs et de musiciens.
I heard so much about Manushya, which Mrinalini had choreographed somewhere in 1949. And then the first time I could see was in the All India Dance Seminar in 1958 in New Delhi, and it was astounding. The form of Kathakali she had not deviated from, but she had bared the form, taking away all the costumes, color, makeup and what have you, and you could see the strength of the form. And you had a vehicle of Chatuni Panikar, exceptionally brilliant, gifted, good looking man with his virility etc. The way he stood there or way he extended his leg and then looked into the water and saw his first mirror, the story of man came alive. And the entire galaxy of the dancers, musicians, painters, scholars, writers, they are astounded what Mrinalini had created. Now, this is the power of her contemporary thinking. This is the power that, having known Kathakali as a dance form, she was able to bring out the essence of the dance form in a most magnificent manner. If the contemporary dance began in India, from the tradition, this is where it began.
Well, I was giving a lecture on Kathakali, and Kathakali actors were all there, and they started showing the gestures and how you do a woman in Kathakali, how you do a hero in Kathakali and so on. But because of the movement of the eyes and the lips and so on, these women started laughing. And that made me really angry because they were doing it so beautifully and so wonderfully well that instead of learning about it, they just laughed. So when I went home that day, I decided that I would do a full Kathakali piece without the costumes to show them the power of Kathakali and how beautiful a form it is.
சின்னஞ்சிறு கிளியே செல்வ களஞ்சியமே சின்னஞ்சிறு கிளியே செல்வ களஞ்சியமே என்னை களி தீர்த்தேன் உலகின் ஏற்றம் புரிய.
The story of Manushya is the story of the life cycle of a human being. As a child comes into infancy, he discovers the power that he has over his hands and his legs, the fact that he has a self that can control this.
ஏற்றம் புரிய வந்தார்.
He becomes a young adolescent, falls in love, gets married, and goes through life till he finally comes to his last few moments.
Teikita, 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 tadim, tadim, kita takadita, tatta, tinta, ta, titeita, tinta, tinta. अंधकाले च मामेव स्मरन् मुक्त्वा कळेबरम् यप्रयादीश समद्भावम् यादि नास्त्यत्र संशयः.
To think that Mrinalini Sarabhai thought of this theme as early as 1949 and used a classical form in a contemporary way was a huge step forward for Indian dance.
Depuis les dernières décennies du XIXe siècle, Rabindranath Tagore est une figure de proue culturelle de l'Inde et son école, Shantiniketan, a été un creuset pour les créateurs et les visionnaires les plus puissants du pays. Passant 3 ans avec le lauréat du prix Nobel, Mrinalini a été considérablement influencé par lui. Tachar Desh, ou le royaume des cartes, était la protestation de Tagore contre les restrictions suffocantes de la religion, particulièrement contre l'hindouisme brahmanical. Un jeune prince est naufragé sur une île, le royaume des cartes, avec des règles qui ne permettent aucune liberté personnelle. Lentement, le prince convertit les habitants en esprits libres.
To develop a movement vocabulary for Tashir Desh, where she wanted to show the limited possibilities of movement that reflected Tagore's interpretation of Brahminism, of people who were so restricted that they wouldn't look right or left or wouldn't bend down and so on and so forth. She once again went back to Kathakali and in some senses reduced the Kathakali movements to a period of absurdity, so that when through the entrance of the prince the characters start getting more and more liberated and finally find complete liberation, she could go back to the strength and the beauty of the actual Kathakali movements.
Gurudev's birth centenary was in 1961, and that was the year we did Tashir Desh. And it became very popular, but it didn't have the force that I wanted it to have. So I changed it a bit and made it very strongly against all isms, not only one but all isms. And in the festival, people really appreciated that and thought that it was a very strong statement against, where mostly people thought it was against communism. In fact, when we did it in China, they did not appreciate it at all, because they were full of what Tashir Desh was. And so it had a meaning for almost every kind of person or every kind of feeling that people had about isms.
En 1979, il a fallu beaucoup de courage pour amener une pièce proclamant l'importance de la liberté personnelle en Chine. Mais Mrinalini n'était pas n'importe quelle danseuse. Entre casser des tabous sociaux en dansant, jusqu'à la mise en scène de danses nouvellement composées par Tagore, et avec sa bénédiction pour les chorégraphier, elle a été la première à amorcer un chemin différent. Elle l'a fait en commençant par s'attaquer à un fléau social sérieux, les crimes de dot et la violence contre les femmes dans la famille.
Jump, that jump, takadimi takajulu jump, that jump, takadimi takajulu jump, that jump, takadimi takajulu jump, that jump,
You know, I was learning Gujarati and trying to read the newspapers, and I was very shocked one day to read about dowry debt. How when there is not enough dowry paid in kind or in money or anything, the girl was very often murdered, and that horrified me. I'd never heard of dowry debts before. So whatever stirs me, I throw out in dance, I should say. And anyway, there was no music about this deaths. So I put everything into Sholgattu, and it worked very well. You know, jump, takadita, takadita, takadita. It goes with the movement, because you didn't have to understand the words, because people often don't understand what the musician is singing, if it's Tamil or Telugu or whatever. Here everyone understood it.
The first time that I ever performed in memory was in the early 90s, and it was then that I realized the sheer horror of this violence. We took it around to several countries besides India as well, and I remember the first time that we performed it abroad was in Perth at the Perth Festival, and the complete horror of the women in the audience, and many of them came backstage and said that though they don't necessarily have dowry violence, as a country which has a lot of violence against women, they understood the violence and the horror and the fear of this.
Une autre innovation que Mrinalini a apportée reste son utilisation d'histoires classiques pour faire comprendre des problèmes contemporains. En 1971, elle a ainsi utilisé l'histoire de Shakuntala du Mahabharata, une épopée indienne.
In the classical story, Dushyanta banishes Shakuntala because she cannot reproduce for him his signet ring, which is the promise of marriage. And Shakuntala is banished and disappears. But in Amma's version, at that stage, when she's banished from the court, she turns around and goes to Dushyanta and says, but a king must have his ring, so where is the ring? She goes to her father Kanva and says, you knew this was going to happen, why didn't you warn me? She goes to her two friends and says, you heard the curse, so why didn't you tell me? And she says, why did nobody tell me that I would have to suffer this? For me, this was an incredibly feminist and very modernistic take on a very classical and very subservient woman kind of story.
I was always looking for subjects that would shake people in dance. And when I heard of this incident in Ranmalpur, I was horrified. I had heard of before of cruelty to Harijans, but I'd never really felt it as I did then. And it was then that I decided that I should dance it and show it to people. And it was then that Tagore had written a play also called Chandalika, which was on the same theme. And I took both of these ideas, Chandalika and my own ideas, and mingled them into a dance where it showed how Harijans were treated in our country, how people killed people, their own people. And that horrified me. And the only way I could talk about it was through dance. Usually dance is considered most beautiful with lovely movements of the hands and the legs. But here I was trying to show something that was ugly. Tagore's poem was wonderful, all the lines I loved, but I couldn't really fit them into this horror.
Bien que dans Chandalika, il s'agissait de l'oppression des intouchables en Inde, elle a touché une corde sensible chez les minorités partout dans le monde.
So what I did was I just took the first two lines of a song and then created the terrible thing that was happening afterwards. So it only started with Tagore, but it ended with my own work of showing the horror, the terror, the fear. All these things couldn't be shown with a beautiful song. It had to be hit hard at people. And so the music also had to be powerful enough for people to feel what was really happening in real life.
അമ്മ പറയും നിങ്ങൾ കഥകളി മറക്കൂ കഥകളി വിട്ടിട്ട് പോവൂ, നിങ്ങൾ കഥകളി ഉള്ളിൽ വെച്ചിരുന്നാൽ പറ്റില്ല, നിങ്ങളുടെ ശരീരം വേറെ എന്താ. ഇപ്പോൾ ഇങ്ങനത്തെ ചില മൂമെൻറ്റുകൾ അഗ്ലി, ഇത് ശരീരം കൊണ്ട് ആർക്കിടെക്റ്റ് ആക്കുക, അതാണ് നമ്മുടെ ഉള്ളിലുണ്ടായിരുന്നത്. പക്ഷേ എനിക്കത് മുഴുവൻ കിട്ടാൻ ബുദ്ധിമുട്ടാൽ ഞാൻ ഇങ്ങനെയൊക്കെ പഠിച്ചതല്ലേ, ഇങ്ങനെ വരും. പക്ഷേ അതിൻ്റെ എഫക്റ്റ് വിക്രം സാരാഭായ് ഫെസ്റ്റിവലിനാണ് ഞങ്ങൾ ആദ്യം ചെയ്തത്. അത് പിറ്റേ ദിവസം അതിനെപ്പറ്റി ആൾക്കാർ പറയുന്നത് കേൾക്കുമ്പോഴാണ് അതിൻ്റെ പ്രയോഗങ്ങളുടെ അനുഭവം. ആദ്യം എനിക്കത് ചെയ്യുന്ന സ്റ്റേജിൽ കയറുന്നത് വരെ ഇത് വേണ്ട, ഇതെനിക്ക് പറ്റില്ല, എൻ്റെ ശരീരത്തിന് പറ്റില്ല എന്നുള്ള ബോഡിയും മൈൻഡും ഒക്കെ ഒരു ഉപയോഗിക്കാൻ പറ്റാത്ത അവസ്ഥയായിരുന്നു. പക്ഷേ അത് ഓഡിയൻസിന് അതിൻ്റെ എഫക്റ്റ് കിട്ടിയെന്ന് കണ്ടപ്പോൾ എന്താ പറയുക, ആനന്ദം എന്നൊക്കെ പറയുന്നില്ല, ആ ഒരവസ്ഥയായിരുന്നു അത് കഴിഞ്ഞപ്പോൾ.
À partir des années 80, le monde a commencé à réaliser l'ampleur de la destruction que le développement causait à notre environnement. Troublé par les nouvelles que les forêts tropicales de la vallée silencieuse du Kerala allaient être partiellement détruites pour un projet hydroélectrique, Mrinalini créa la première de ses nombreuses pièces environnementales.
It had always bothered me that the amount of tree cutting everywhere, not only in Gujarat but in other states, that people so carelessly cut huge trees which have taken so long to grow. And so I started in a small association of friends of the trees, and we tried to prevent any tree cutting anywhere. We would go and tell the people that please don't cut this tree, look how beautiful it is, look what it's doing for the shade and everything like that. And then Silent Valley happened in Kerala, and that was a huge project on destroying nature. So naturally people wrote to me, and they even sent me some beautiful music. And to that music I created a small dance drama, and we went everywhere in Kerala dancing that and speaking about nature and about the destruction of nature.
There are still those who believe in violence, who do not realize that they destroy the earth, and with that they destroy man, all human beings. Who believe in violence Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. Father, do not forgive them, for they do know what they do. Father, I came for peace. I too came for peace. Hey Ram,
ആദ്യം ഈ സൈലൻറ്റ് വാലിയെ പറ്റി ഞാൻ വായിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട്. സൈലൻറ്റ് വാലിയെ പറ്റിയിട്ട് പാലക്കാടാവുകൊണ്ട് എനിക്ക് അതിനെപ്പറ്റി അറിയുകയും ചെയ്യാം. പക്ഷേ അതിൻ്റെ ഈ പ്രശ്നങ്ങൾ കഥകളി ഇതിനൊക്കെ ഉപയോഗിക്കാം എന്നുള്ളത് എനിക്കറിയില്ലായിരുന്നു. ക്ലാസിക്കൽ നൃത്തം ഇങ്ങനെ ഉപയോഗിക്കുക എന്നുള്ളത്. ആദ്യം ഞങ്ങളിത് ഡൽഹിയിൽ ഇന്ദിരാഗാന്ധിയുടെ മുമ്പിലാണ് ചെയ്തത്. ഇന്ദിരാഗാന്ധിയുടെ നിറച്ച് ഓഡിയൻസ് ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു, അവിടെ ചെയ്തു. പക്ഷേ ഈ ഓരോ സീൻ കഴിയുമ്പോൾ എസ്പെഷ്യലി ഈ ക്രൈസ്റ്റിൻ്റെ ചില ഭാഗങ്ങളുണ്ട്, അത് ഓഡിയൻസിൻ്റെ ഇടയിൽ നിന്ന് എന്നുള്ള ശബ്ദം വെച്ചാൽ റിയാക്ഷൻ, അതാണല്ലോ ഇന്ത്യൻ കലകളുടെ ഉദ്ദേശം തന്നെ, രസം നമുക്ക് കിട്ടുക എന്നാണ്.
First time I saw the Ganga, the sacred river of the Hindus, I was really surprised. I was only 9 years old, but I could see how dirty people had made it, and how they could even bathe in it or worship it was beyond my imagination. Many years later I saw it again, and that's what gave me the idea for the dance drama Ganga.
Oh, machines, throw the effluents into our Ganga. Is this your worship?
It was how to make people realize that this river Ganga that they worshipped, and a dip in the Ganga meant you purified yourself. But how could you purify yourself in a river that was not even clean? And I thought that people also are very much like the Ganga, though we pretend to be very good and very, what should I say, harmonious with each other. We ourselves are so polluted inside that we don't even see pollution when we see it in the waters of the Ganga. We think just a dip in the Ganga and all our sins are forgiven. And I felt that somehow I have to tell people that they too must strive to be clear and clean and without any malice at all, like the Ganga was, not what the Ganga is today, but what the Ganga was.
सपने हम साकार करेंगे, भरोसा है वजूद है, भरोसा है.
Vers les années 80, Mrinalini est devenue de plus en plus inquiète par le fait que les jeunes semblaient inconscients de la réalité en Inde et des problèmes auxquels ils étaient confrontés et devaient adresser. Cette préoccupation s'est exprimée à travers un poème intitulé « Est-ce un rêve ?»
We had a well-known poet friend from Bhopal, Manohar Ashi, translated into Hindi as Kya Yeh Ek Sapna Hai, and Amma created a dance piece around it with the objective that it could go anywhere, with or without a stage, with or without technical facilities, but that it should somehow connect with audiences, whatever kind of audiences they were, whether they were young or whether rural, urban, and so on. And over the years, this piece has performed in all sorts of spaces, I think more than 10,000 times, and it has always hit the mark.
जिसे जो
जो पूजे उसे वो पूजे।
I use the folk dance as a link between all the people of India because everyone can understand the language and the dance. And I thought that this was something we could take around everywhere, and it had, not moral, I don't like the word moral, but it had a lesson in it to teach people. I never think of writing, it just comes to me. Certain thoughts come to me and then I put them down. I don't think ahead of what I'm going to write. And I just am in a mood and I write something.
Au fil du temps, Is It a Dream a été exécuté dans des milliers de lieux et a été enseigné dans des dizaines d'écoles. Un film réalisé sur la pièce a été repris plusieurs fois à la télévision. La pièce a suscité beaucoup de réflexions chez les jeunes. Par exemple, le sectarisme, la haine communale et religieuse et le viol.
सबका है हक, बंधन नहीं कोई बंधन नहीं, बंधन नहीं कोई बंधन नहीं। A child is born called Krishna, a child is born called Krishna.
Plus tôt, Mrinalini avait expérimenté avec une comédie musicale d'un style occidental sur les histoires de Krishna, en collaborant avec les musiciens de jazz, Louis Banks, et avait enthousiasmé les enfants qui ont aimé la musique rap et les rythmes occidentaux. C'était l'une de ses nombreuses tentatives pour présenter de façon moderne la mythologie indienne pour un public jeune d'aujourd'hui. À l'été 2004, Mrinalini a entrepris un des plus grands défis qu'un chorégraphe peut relever: illustrer l'histoire de la science indienne par la danse.
Swati Piramal came one day. I didn't know her, but she came to meet me and asked me if I would do a dance drama on science. I said, even though I was married to an eminent scientist, I don't know whether I could do it. She said, no, I'm sure you can. And it was a challenge for me. So I started working on it and reading about science, how to put it together. To put science into dance is quite difficult. And so I tried my best and finally managed to come out somehow, and I think I got all the facts correct, and I knew much more about science after that. I was full of triangles and decimals and all sorts of shapes, and it had to be visually beautiful, otherwise nobody would understand it. And so I just went on trying to do whatever I could with the figures, and as many figures as possible. But once it started, and once I started getting a kind of feel of it, then it went very smoothly. It was great fun. I enjoyed it.
The inspiration for the whole of Indian mathematics is geometry. The beginnings of algebra can be traced to the constructional geometry of the Vedic priests.
The triangle and the square were formed at this time. With 4 times the square root of the total, he killed his horses.
is huge amount of work choreographed by Mrinalini Sarabhai. The concerns are contemporary as they were relevant 60 years ago or even today. Take the issue of environment, take the issue of empowerment of women, take the issue of Dalit women, take the issue of dowry deaths. Mrinal has touched it so beautifully and has convincingly taken them not as a copy of the West or shadow of the West, but taking from the very roots of the tradition of Kathakali or Bharatanatyam. Some may find it very distorted, she had to do it because of the necessity of the choreography, etc., but the resonances are entirely Indian. Be it music, she also experimented with the music of Beethoven or other musicians from the West, etc., but the core remained very, very Indian, and that is where her genius lies. The genius always works out in a manner where even the Indianness is redefined, and this redefinement of the Indianness in her work is so exemplary that the contemporary, the young generation today would learn a lot from it, that how if you are truly Indian, genuinely Indian, take from your roots and from your tradition, you can create wonders.
Krishna ni begane baro, Krishna ni begane baro, Krishna ni begane baro, begane baro, mugabanne toro, Krishna ni begane baro, ni baro, Krishna. Ni baro, Krishna.